Hello, everyone. Welcome to Maria's English podcast series. I think the series can definitely help you with your English in various ways. So stick with me to the end to discover things together here. In this episode, we're going to read an article from the BBC's website with the title, What's the Right Age to Get a Smartphone? You will find the link for the article in the description below or on the video. And if you're watching the video version, you will be able to read the article on the screen. There are a lot of interesting articles about lots of different subjects on the BBC website, written in academic style. But these articles are readable and very similar to the kind of reading texts you find in an IELTS test. So it would be really helpful to read such articles on a regular basis, whether you are preparing for an exam or seeking to develop your level of English generally. Today, I will help you do just that with this article. Before we begin reading, I would like you to consider some questions because this will prepare you to understand the article more easily. It is an important step to get your mind ready for reading. So, pause here for a few minutes and try to answer these questions on your head or out loud in English. First question. How old were you when you got your first mobile phone? Second, do you feel that was the right time for you to have a mobile phone? Why? Third, what are the things you gained by having one? Fourth, what did you miss out on because of having a mobile phone? So you can pause the episode here to answer these questions, or we can carry on. The second thing I would like you to do before I begin reading is to read the article by yourself twice by clicking the link in the description. The first time, read the article silently, and then read it for a second time out loud. Okay? You don't have to read it all, maybe a few paragraphs, but do try doing so, and try to read it with intonation. Put some life to it. Think about the right pauses. Which ones are the emphasized words? Where would the tone go up or down? So pause and take a few minutes to read. Okay, now let me read the article for you. I'll read it into sections. We'll stop at the end of each section to paraphrase and talk about vocabulary. So let's begin the article. The title is What's the Right Age to Get a Smartphone? And as you can see, it was published on 15 September 2022 and written by Kelly Oakes. The article is in the future section, the family tree. There are a lot of articles that you can find on the website. Okay, so let's begin. Smartphones have become near universal among children, with up to 91% of 11-year-olds owning one. But do children miss out without a phone or experience surprising benefits? It is a very modern dilemma. Should you hand your child a smartphone or keep them away from the devices as long as possible? As a parent, You'd be forgiven for thinking of a smartphone as a sort of Pandora's box with the ability to unleash all the world's evils on your child's wholesome life. The bewildering array of headlines relating to the possible impact of children's phone and social media use are enough to make anyone want to opt out. Apparently, even celebrities are not immune to this modern parenting problem. Madonna has said that she regretted giving her older children phones at age 13 and wouldn't do it again. On the other hand, you probably have a phone yourself that you consider an essential tool for daily life, from emails and online shopping to video calls and family photo albums. And if your child's classmates and friends are all getting phones, won't they miss out without one? There are still many unanswered questions on the long term effects of smartphones and social media on children and teenagers, but existing research provides some evidence on their main risks and benefits. In particular, while there is no overarching evidence showing that owning a phone or using social media is harmful to children's well being in general, that may not tell the full story. Most research so far focuses on adolescents rather than younger age groups, and emerging evidence shows there may be specific developmental phases where children are more at risk from negative effects. What's more, experts agree on several key factors to consider when deciding if your child is ready for a smartphone and what you should do once they own one. Data from Ofcom, the UK's communications regulator, show that the vast majority of children in the UK own a smartphone by the age of 11, with ownership rising from 44% at age 9 to 91% at age 11. In the US, 37% of parents of 9 to 11-year-olds say their child has their own smartphone. And in a European study across 19 countries, 80% of children aged 9 to 16 reported using a smartphone to go online daily or almost daily. By the time we get to older teens, over 90% of kids have a phone, says Candice Ogers, professor of psychological science at the University of California, Irvine in the US. While a European report into digital technology use among children from birth to 8 years old found that this age group had limited or no perception of online risks, when it comes to the detrimental effects of smartphone use and social media apps accessed through them on older children, solid evidence is lacking. Authors analyzed 6 meta-analyses looking at the link between digital technology use and child and adolescent mental health, as well as other large-scale studies and daily diary studies. She found no consistent link between adolescents' technology use and their well-being. The majority of studies find no association between social media use and mental health, says Ogers. In the studies that did find an association, the effect sizes, both positive and negative, were small. The biggest finding really was a disconnect between what people believe, including adolescents themselves, and what the evidence actually says, she says. The only person who really can judge how social media affects children is often the one closest to them, Amy Orban. Another view by Amy Orban, an experimental psychologist at the University of Cambridge, UK, also found the evidence inconclusive. While there was a small negative correlation on average across the studies included, Orban concluded it was impossible to know whether the technology was causing the dip in well being or vice versa, or whether other factors were influencing both. Much of the research in this area is not of high enough quality to deliver meaningful results, she notes. Of course, these results are averages. there's an inherent large variation around that impact on well being that has been found in the scientific literature, says Orban. And the experience of individual teenagers will depend on their own personal circumstances. The only person who really can judge that is often the people who are closest to them, she adds. In practical terms, this means that regardless of what the broader evidence says, there may be children who do struggle as the result of using social media or certain apps, and it's important for parents to be attuned to this and offer support. On the other hand, for some young people, a phone can become a lifeline, somewhere to find a new norm of form of access and social networking as a person with a disability, or a place to search for answers to pressing questions about your health. Imagine you are a teacher worried that puberty is going wrong, or your sexuality isn't the same as your friends, or worried about climate change when the adults around you are bored with it, says Sonia Livingstone, professor of social psychology at the London School of Economics, UK, and co author of the book Parenting for a Digital Future. For the most part, though, when they're using their phone for communication, children are talking to friends and family. If you actually analyze who kids are talking to online, there is a very strong overlap with their offline network, says Ogers. I think this whole idea that we're losing a kid in isolation to the phone, for some kids, that can be a real risk. But for the vast majority of kids, they're connecting, they're sharing, they're co viewing. In fact, while smartphones are often blamed for children spending less time outdoors, a Danish study of 11 to 15-year-olds found some evidence that phones actually give children independent mobility by increasing parents' sense of security and helping to navigate unfamiliar surroundings. Children said phones enhanced their experience outside through listening to music and keeping in touch with parents and friends. Of course, the ability to be in near constant communication with peers doesn't come without risk. I think that the phone has been a fantastic unleashing of what was always an unmet need on the part of young people, says Livingstone. But for many, it can become coercive. It can become incredibly normative. It can pressure them into feeling that there is a place where the popular people are, which they are struggling to get into or might be excluded from, where everyone is doing the same kind of thing and knows about the latest, whatever it is. In fact, in a paper published early this year, Orban and colleagues found windows of developmental sensitivity where social media use is associated with a later period of lower life satisfaction, a specific at specific ages during adolescence. So let's go back and think about what we've just read, and then we'll move on. So, the question whether it is beneficial for young children to have a phone or not is a modern dilemma, a question that all parents have. And according to what it says here, um, a lot of parents think that uh, having a smartphone could unleash all the words evils, meaning it would release evils in on your child's life. And there's also there are a lot of headlines and media coverage, and even celebrities who also feel that um, it's something negative and they wouldn't do they wouldn't give it to their children at a young age. But on the other hand, having a phone is really helpful. It's actually an important part of our daily life because we can do so many things using it. Send emails, do our shopping, connect with family and friends in various ways, text, audio, or video, and have our photo albums. And if all children or the majority of children have mobile phones, how would your child feel without one? That's an important question. However, we have to think about long term effects when it comes to the use of smartphones and social media. There has been some research which provides evidence on the main risks and benefits, according to the article here. But while there is no overarching evidence showing that owning a phone or using social media is harmful, that may not tell the full story. And what do we mean by overarching evidence? We mean serious evidence, important evidence. And the truth is that most research so far is based on adolescents rather than younger age groups. So we don't have enough data. And emerging evidence, by emerging we mean appearing evidence, evidence that appears, shows that there may be specific developmental phases in the development of a child when there is more risk and effects can be negative. And as it is stated, experts feel there are key factors to think about when deciding if your child is ready to use a smartphone. Here we have data from UK and US and Europe in general, showing that the majority of teenagers and young kids um, have a mobile phone. Actually, the rates are pretty high. Now let's see what Candice Odgers, a professor at the University of California, says. According to a report into digital technology use among young children up to 8 years of age, such young age groups have no perception of online risks. Perception of online risks, meaning they are not aware of online risks. And when it comes to the detrimental effects of smartphone use, by detrimental effects, we mean damaging effects, negative effects. But solid evidence is lacking. Solid evidence, like hard evidence, firm evidence. We don't have enough evidence, in other words. And Odgers analyzed 6 analyses looking at the link between digital technology and child and adolescent mental health. So, studies show that there is no consistent link between adolescents' technology use and their well being. And what do we mean by no consistent link? No reliable link. The majority of studies find no association between social media use and mental health. But what the studies did find was a disconnect between what people believe and the evidence. And by disconnect, we mean here lack of connection. People believe different things from what came up. Amy Orban, another psychologist, also found the evidence inconclusive. Again, by inconclusive, we mean not definite. While there was a small negative correlation on average across studies, so while there was a small negative link, it was impossible to know whether the technology was causing the dip in well being, meaning the decline in well being, or vice versa, meaning the other way around, or whether other factors were influencing both. Much of the research in this area is not of high enough quality to deliver meaningful results. Again, it talks about the results being averages. There's an inherent large variation around the impact that has been found in the scientific literature. The experience of individual teenagers will depend on their own personal circumstances. So we have to think about the individual. The only person who can judge that is often the people who are closest to them. In practical terms, this means that regardless of what the broader evidence says, it is important for parents to be attuned to this and offer support. And what we mean here by attuned is that parents need to be aware of this. On the other hand, for some young people, a phone can become a lifeline. It is really important for them. A new form of access, social networking as a person with a disability, a place to search for answers to pressing questions. Imagine you're a teenager worried about puberty, in other words, adolescence. If something is going wrong with that, your sexuality isn't the same as your friends, worried about climate change, etc. I think it's pretty clear here. So, for the most part, when they're using their phone for communication, children are talking to friends and family about all these issues that are important to them. And in fact, if you analyze who kids are talking to online, there's a very strong overlap with their offline network. What do we mean by that? That the people children usually talk to online are usually the people they talk to when they're offline. The about the same group of people. I think the whole idea that we're losing a kid in isolation to the phone, for some kids, that can be a real risk. But for the vast majority of kids, they're connecting, they're sharing, they're co-viewing. So it doesn't affect negatively the majority, in other words. In fact, while smartphones are often blamed for children spending less time outdoors, there's a Danish study showing that phones give children independent mobility by increasing parents' sense of security and helping to navigate unfamiliar surroundings. Children said phones enhanced their experience, meaning made better the experience outside through listening to music, keeping in touch with parents and friends. Of course, the ability to be in near constant communication with peers doesn't come without a risk. I think that the phone has been a fantastic unleashing of what was always an unmet need on the part of young people. But for many, it can become coercive, meaning forcing. It can become incredibly normative, standard, in other words. It can pressure them into feeling that there is a place where the popular people are, which they're struggling to get into or might be excluded from, where everyone is doing the same kind of thing and knows about the latest, whatever it is. Um, and there is a paper published with the title Social Media Uses, showing where there's a paper published earlier this year where Orban and colleagues found windows of developmental sensitivity, where social media use is associated with a later period of lower life satisfaction. Now, let's read the rest. For many, phones can become coercive. Sonia Livingstone. Analyzing data from over 17,000 participants aged between 10 and 21, the researchers found that higher use of social media at ages 11 to 13 for girls and 14 to 15 for boys predicted lower life satisfaction a year later. The reverse was also true. Lower social media use at this age predicted higher life satisfaction the following year. This aligns with the fact that girls tend to go through puberty earlier than boys, the researchers say, though there is not enough evidence to say that this is the cause of the difference in timing. Another window appeared at age 19 for both male and female participants, around the time that many teenagers leave home. Parents should take these age ranges with a pinch of salt when making decisions for their own families, but it's worth being aware that developmental changes could make children more sensitive to the negative side of social media. During the teenage years, for example, the brain changes massively, and this can influence how young people act and feel, including making them more sensitive to social relationships and status. Being a teenager is really a major time of development, says Orban. You're much more impacted by your peers, you're much more interested in what other people think about you. And the design of social media, the way that it provides social contact and feedback on, more or less, a click of a button, might be more stressful at certain times. As well as age, other factors could influence the impact of social media on children and teenagers, but researchers are only just beginning to explore these individual differences. This is really a core area of research now, says Orban. There will be people who are more negatively or positively impacted at different time points. That might be due to living different lives, going through development at different points. They might be using social media differently. We really need to tease those things apart. While research can provide food for thought for families deciding whether to buy their child a smartphone, it can't offer specific answers to the question of when. I think by saying that things are more complex, Naturally, it does push the question back to the parents, says Orban. But that might actually not be such a bad thing because it's so heavily individual. The key question parents need to ask, says Olgers, is how does it fit for the child and for the family? For many parents, buying a child a phone is a practical decision. In a lot of cases, parents are the ones that want the younger children to have phones so that they can keep in touch throughout the day. They can coordinate pickups, says Olgers. It can also be seen as a milestone on the road to adulthood. I think for children, it gives them a sense of independence and responsibility, says Anja Stavik, researcher in the Department of Communication at the University of Vienna, Austria. This is definitely something that parents should consider. Are their children at a stage where they are responsible enough to have their own device? Set aside time to go through what's on the phone together. Sonia Livingstone. One factor parents shouldn't overlook is how comfortable they feel with their child having a smartphone. In one study by Stavik and colleagues, when parents felt a lack of control over their children's smartphone use, both parents and children reported more conflicts over the device. It's worth remembering, though, that having a smartphone need not open the floodgates to every single app or game available. I'm increasingly hearing when I interview children that parents are giving them the phone but introducing requirements to check and discuss what apps they get. And I think that this is probably really wise, says Livingstone. Parents could also, for example, spend time playing games with children to make sure they're happy with the content, or set aside time to go through what's on the phone together. There's some amount of supervision, but there has to be this communication and openness to it to be able to support them for what they're seeing and experiencing online, just like offline, says Odgers. When setting house rules for smartphone use, such as not keeping the phone in a child's bedroom overnight, parents also need to take an honest look at their own smartphone use. Children hate hypocrisy, says Livingstone. They hate feeling they're being told off for something that their parents do, like using the phone at meal times or going to bed with a phone. Even very young children learn from their parents' phone use. A European report into digital technology use among children from birth to 8 years old found that this age group had little or no awareness of the risks, but that children often mirrored their parents' technology use. Some parents even discovered during the study that children knew their device passwords and so could access them independently. But parents can use this to their advantage by getting younger children involved during smartphone based tasks and modeling good practice. I think this involvement and co use, that's actually a good way for them to learn what's happening on this device and what it is for, says Stavik. Ultimately, when to buy a smartphone for a child comes down to a value decision for parents. For some, the right decision will be not to buy one, and with a little bit of creativity, children without smartphone don't have to miss out. Children who are reasonably confident and sociable will find workarounds and be part of the group, says Livingstone. After all, mostly their social life is at school. Mostly they see each other every day anyway. In fact, learning to cope with the fear of missing out they feel by not having a phone could prove a useful lesson for older teenagers when, no longer constrained by their parents, they inevitably buy one for themselves and need to learn how to set limits. The trouble with the fear of missing out is that it's never ending, so everyone's got to learn to draw a line somewhere, says Livingstone. Otherwise, you'd just be scrolling 24/7. All right, so let's go back and comment a bit. For many, phones can become coercive. coercive forcing. Analyzing data, over 70,000 participants found that, yes, okay, so we have some data which has been analyzed and in different age groups for girls and boys, and they predicted lower life satisfaction a year later. And also the reverse was also true. This aligns with the fact that girls tend to go through puberty earlier, aligns with the fact. It means that it coordinates with the fact. There is not enough evidence to say this is the cause of the difference in timing. Another window appeared at the age 19 for both male and female participants, around the time that many teenagers leave home. So parents should take these age ranges with a pinch of salt. What do we mean by this expression, a pinch of salt? We mean parents should be slightly skeptical. Um, it's worth being aware that developmental changes could make children more sensitive to the negative side of social media. During the teenage years, for example, the brain changes massively, and this can influence how young people act and feel, including making them more sensitive to social relationships and status. I think this is easy to understand. Being a teenager is a major time of development. You're much more impacted by your peers, influenced by your peers. You're much more interested in what other people think about you, and the design of social media, the way that it provides social contact, feedback on a click of a button might be more stressful. Um, as well as age, other factors could influence the impact of social media on children and teenagers. But researchers are only just beginning to explore these individual differences. This is a really core area of research. This is the basic part, the important part of research at the moment. There will be people who are more negatively or positively influenced at different time points. That might be due to living different lives, going through development at different points. They might be using social media differently. Um, okay, research provide food for thought for families deciding whether to buy their child a smartphone. They can offer specific answers to the question of when. So it all comes down to the parents' decision. Uh, they have to think, how does it fit for the child and for the family? For many parents, buying a child phone is a practical decision because they can keep in touch throughout the day, they can coordinate pickups. It can also be seen as a milestone on the road to adulthood, meaning uh, an important point on the road to adulthood. It gives children a sense of independence and responsibility. So, parents should consider if the children are at a stage where they're responsible enough to have their own device. Set aside time to go through what's on the phone together. That's an interesting idea set on the table by Sonia Livingstone. Um, both parents and children reported, let's see, um, When parents felt a lack of control over their children's smartphone use, both parents and children reported more conflicts over the device, disagreements, fights. It is worth remembering that having a smartphone need not open the floodgates to every single app or game available. Um, so more and more parents are introducing requirements to check and discuss which apps they get when they give mobile phones to their children, and that's a wise decision, says Livingstone. They could spend time playing games with the children, make sure they're happy with the content, see what's on the phone together, to go through what's on the phone. There's some amount of supervision, so supervision is important, but there has to be this communication and openness to it. Okay. When setting house rules for smartphone use, such as not keeping the phone in the child's bedroom overnight, parents need to take an honest look at their own smartphone use. Children hate hypocrisy, and as it is stated here, they imitate their parents' actions. So it's important for parents to show their children the right use of the device by using it the right way themselves. This is basically the meaning of these paragraphs here. Uh, Even very young children, up to 8 years old, who had no awareness of the risks involved, could mirror their parents' technology use. So it's important to set the right examples. In other words, ultimately, when to buy a smartphone for a child comes down to a value decision for parents. For some, the right decision will not be to buy one. And with a little bit of creativity, children without a smartphone don't have to miss out. There are other things that they could do. Children who are reasonably confident and sociable will find workarounds and be part of the group. They will find different ways to connect with their peers. After all, mostly their social life is at school. They see each other every day. In fact, learning to cope with the fear of missing out they feel by not having a phone could prove a useful lesson for older teenagers when they will buy one for themselves and they will need to set limits. The trouble with the fear of missing out is, is that it's never ending. Everyone's got to learn to draw a line. And what do you mean by drawing a line? Setting a limit. Otherwise, you'd just be scrolling 24/7. So, I hope the article is a bit clearer now. You probably should read it again, and it would be a good idea to note down the unknown vocabulary that you encounter and perhaps use a dictionary to help you understand the meaning better and listen to the explanations that I gave you. Now, after finishing reading your article, I would like you to think about these questions. First, what are the points made in the article which you found interesting? Second, after reading the article, which would you say are the benefits of the use of mobile phones by young children and teenagers? And third, which are the drawbacks of using mobile phones at such ages? Think about your answers. Try to work them out on your head or express them orally in English. And see you in our next episode. Have a lovely day. Bye.